Let's look at it. The great poet and dramatist, the Kalidasa, is quite often described as the Shakespeare of the Sanskrit literature. Okay? And then there's another context. Last summer, he went to his uncle's village and enjoyed very much. Alright, let's look at both the contexts. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 and Part 4. Okay, let's quickly address part by part. Okay, the great poet and dramatist. And then again I have the definite article repeated here, which I feel is redundant. I can remove it. It doesn't make sense. The great poet and dramatist, who? Kalidasa, is quite often is in fact a collocation, and there's nothing wrong with that. Quite often meaning it's not quiet, it's not Q-U-I-E-T, it's Q-U-I-T-E, which is a adverb, right? The great poet and dramatist Kalidasa is quite often described as quite often is a collocation. You would hear people say that repeatedly in various, quite often I see this person walking in late to office. Or quite often the canteen is closed during these hours. I'm just giving random examples with quite often. Quite is just an intensifier, right? So the great poet and dramatist Kalidasa is quite often described as the Shakespeare of the Sanskrit literature, which is absolutely fine. The obvious error for me is in part 2, where you need to delete the. We cannot remove the definite article before Shakespeare because he is kind of looked at as somebody. So it's like saying Sai is the Gandhiji of our class, right? Just to give you an example. So in this context, what I'm saying is, I'm using Sai and comparing him to Mahatma Gandhi, and I'm saying, why? Because probably, if there is a fight that comes up in the class, Sai always kind of, resorts to peaceful ways in trying to find a solution, right? Instead of getting into a fight, right? So when you're referring to that, the is critical here because he is referred to as the Shakespeare of what? The Sanskrit language. So here, both the definite articles in these places are extremely important to complete the sentence meaningfully and grammatically. Because they're specifying which literature. So the is correct there in front of Sanskrit also. So the great poet and dramatist Kalidasa is quite often described as the Shakespeare of the Sanskrit literature. So here the error is in part 2, right, where you delete the before Kalidasa. The next one, last summer he went to his uncle's village and enjoyed very much. So here when you read the context itself, you understand that something is funny somewhere. Can you quickly identify which part has the error? What's missing there? Last summer he went to his uncle's village and enjoyed what? Did he enjoy himself or he enjoyed something in particular? So there's something that's missing there, right? What is missing? Not why? What's wrong with very much? Very much is this is again a collocation, right? We hear people saying this a lot. Last summer he went to his uncle's village and enjoyed himself. So the reflexive pronoun is missing where it's not completing the meaning of the context. So he enjoyed himself. So error is in part 4. You add himself before very or after enjoyed, whatever, right? So last summer he went to his uncle's village and enjoyed himself very much. Very much is a collocation. We've used this repeatedly in various contexts, right? Every one of the films you suggested are not worth seeing. Let's put down the parts. Every one of the films is part 1. You suggested is part 2. Are not worth seeing is part 3. Where do you think the error is and why? Those of you who've gone through the finding error types, most of you are coming back and saying part 1. I want you to look at the question clearly, and if you're telling if this is the part, what do we need to change? Do we need to delete something? Do we need to add something? Why is part 1 incorrect? In line to go with part 3, right? So just to quickly explain, like Hari used none, but I have are, no? Remember, the verb is in plural. So to go in line with that, if we go by Hari's rephrased sentence, part 1 also will have an error, part 3 also will have an error. But if I need to just stick to one part, instead of each one, what can I change in part 1 to align itself with this plural verb are is my question. I've given you a hint. If we want to make sure, hey, one part is where we want to change, it will mean we'll have to change 2 parts. If I have to change just one part or most, yes, either all or most of the films you suggested are not worth seeing, or all of the films you suggested are not worth seeing. So we can just change, we'll say, hey, part 1 is where the error is, right? You change everyone to, because we're referring to films, right? Everyone is incorrect, most or all. So it will align itself with a plural verb. If I have to change are to is, then the construction will change again, right? Each one of the film you suggested is not worth seeing. Each one of the films you suggested is not worth seeing. Yeah? Okay. So you guys can kind of argue between part 1 and part 3, but I've given an explanation for all the parts in case you want to change, right? If you want to change are to is, then you'll have to change each one of the films you suggested is not worth seeing. However, then it becomes where we have 2 parts. The subject is films, right? It's not a person. So that's why it makes sense to remove everyone and change it to most or all. If we change part 3 to is, then it will become each one of the films you suggested is not worth seeing. Got it? She explained with sorrow that our younger son died 6 days before. Okay, where do you think the error is? Do you think there is any error, or you think it's okay? Replace before with ago. Okay. Anything else? Anybody has anything different? So I have all the options, in fact, except for option 2. So where do you think the error is for this one? She explained with that her younger son died 6 days before. Okay, let's quickly look at it. I'm not going to wait for people to respond. She explained with sorrow as a expression is correct, right? Just to give you examples, the children exclaimed with excitement. You don't have to add some person there. Explained me, in fact, is incorrect, right? You don't have to say she explained me with sorrow. She explained with sorrow. It's understood that this person is explaining to you only. So you don't have to mention that. So part 1 is fine as it is. She explained with sorrow that her younger son died 6 days before. I would say the error is in, when I say 6 days before, I usually refer to something before what, right? Before, was it before New Year? Was it before Christmas? Was it before today? Are you following? Right? The right phrase would be 6 days ago. So this person is, so when I say 6 days before, it makes more sense to before what? So I feel the error is in part 4 where you change before to ago. I don't see any other part which has an error. Seems to be like a pretty simple sentence otherwise. Has died, yeah, even I thought about it. Because we're talking about an action that started sometime earlier and is current till now. So she explains that his younger son had died 6 days before. Also makes sense. Because of the context of 6 days before, right, I kind of didn't look at that. Where we're saying the action obviously started in the past, which is 6 days back. But I would still change 6 days before. As a phrase, it doesn't sit right with me. I would still change that. And here perfect tense would make sense with the context talking about action started sometime in the past and is continuing up till now, where she's explained with sorrow, she's still feeling the pain, right? I still feel you can still go with died as it is, right? The past tense. But either ways, I will go with the obvious error being 4. I'm not too sure about 3 if you ask me. Was died is definitely an incorrect context here. Instead of died, in fact, I would use a more appropriate phrase would be passed away. Yeah.